Hi everyone, my name is Flora Kim and I work as an event coordinator for the Economics Career Office. I'm a third year studying economics and will also be your moderator for today. We're so excited to be hosting today's How I Got This Job real estate panel with Brendan Knox. Thank you, Brendan, for spending time with us today.
Yeah, thank you all.
Before we start off the panel, just a little bit about the ECO first. The ECO was launched in April of 2013 when our director, Jen Jones, was hired by the department chair, Charlie Holt, to work a few days a week and provide career advising to econ majors while building a database of our alumni. An econ-focused career office was established thanks to the leadership of Professors Ken Elzinga, Charlie Holt, Ed Burton, John Pepper, and Lee Kopic. These faculty envisioned a career services office in Monroe Hall that focused on the career development of our majors and, as our bandwidth allows, prospective majors in addition. Our operations are only possible because of our alumni investment, who share not only their financial support, but also giving back to the department their time and expertise. So students, here's how we'll run this program. Out of respect for our panelists, please keep your video on, but your mic off to demonstrate your engagement throughout the panel. If you're in a position where you can't keep your video on, please message Jen Jones via chat. Casual dress is completely fine here. Jen will spotlight Brendan as we kick off the panel, and Jen will also likely keep me spotlighted. You can send questions at any time to Jen, and we'll get to them during the Q&A. When we begin the Q&A, you can either unmute yourself and ask your question directly, or feel free to send your questions using the chat function to everyone. So that our panelists can get an idea of who's on the call, students, could you please send in the chat your year and major? Okay, fourth year, econ. A lot of third and fourth years, some second years that are pre-com and econ. So it seems like we have a pretty diverse group of students in terms of age, and a lot of econ students, which is really great. We love to see that. Okay, so without any further delay, I will once again welcome our guests and launch this talk. Brendan, could you begin by introducing yourself and giving us a little bit of a skim of your UVA resume? You could talk about your majors, degrees, any organizations you were a part of at UVA, and internships you've held. And then also, if you'd like, you can talk about your career trajectory since you've left.
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Flora. Everyone, my name's Brendan Knox. So I originally am from an area called Mars, is a little bit north of Pittsburgh. And can you guys still hear me? Okay, perfect. So at UVA, I was an econ major with a minor in technology entrepreneurship. Organizations wise, I probably wish I was a little more involved during my time. The only really organization I was in a fraternity, Sigma Alpha Mu. I did do, it was called the Frank Batten Investment Fund. I don't know if it even still exists, but a friend started it and I joined that, but wasn't very intensive. After my second year at UVA, I did an internship with a regional Pittsburgh-based M&A advisory firm called Stone Pier Capital Investors. With that company, I did a lot of company and industry valuation reports. So it provided a little kind of intro to finance experience. During my third year, wasn't really sure what I wanted to do or where I wanted to go. And Jen actually was the one who found and got me started with the CoStar internship, which I would accept and participate in summer after third year. CoStar it's a widely used real estate database in the real estate industry. So though the actual internship wasn't, I wouldn't say it was very rigorous or too structured. It was very recognizable in the real estate field. And from there, I eventually accepted a position with Washington REIT in the DC area. So Washington REIT, which is actually the original REIT ever created, it owned a portfolio of office, multifamily, and retail assets in the DC area. It was unique in the sense it operated and owned several asset classes in one metro, whereas usually a REIT will own and operate one asset class in different locations and areas. So I worked there from summer of 2019 through the summer of 2021. And at that point, so the work started to slow down the last year, and eventually found out that Washington REIT was selling the portfolio, the office portfolio that I worked on, to Brookfield. And so with that transaction, I joined the Brookfield team in right after Labor Day of last year. And that is where I've been ever since.
Thank you for that good little rundown. You talked about Washington REIT a little bit, and I think some of the students here might not be familiar with what a REIT is. Could you talk about, just explain, what it is?
Yeah, so, and excuse me, take a little long, but so Washington REIT, I guess so a REIT in general, a REIT is a company that serves to just operate real estate. And by law, they're required to pay 90% of their revenue in the form of dividends to stockholders. So, I mean, you can even go buy Washington REIT now if you'd like on stock exchanges, and you buy the stock of any REIT and you get usually a pretty good dividend. And then obviously the stock price itself can increase in value. So Washington REIT was smaller. It's a regional firm. The transaction actually they just did was a pretty significant regional transaction. Like Washington REIT was, like I said, was the original REIT. I think it was founded in maybe the 60s. So it had owned that portfolio for a long time. But yeah, so basically my job in asset management with respect to Washington REIT. So every one of these office buildings that I worked on, they're like little businesses essentially. They provide revenue, they have expenses, you have to put capital into them. So our team kind of manages that. We manage the on-site property managers, which is, I mean, you deal with them in apartments, right? They're the people on site if you have issues. We oversee the engineers, make sure that the building is leased by working with third-party brokerage shops such as CBRE or JLL or Cushman & Wakefield. Some of those you probably recognize. Really an attempt to maximize the revenue that the building can earn. And then we forecast those numbers. We did a 3-year forecast. So really big picture REIT, it's just a firm that owns real estate. It's literally just basically a collection of buildings that serves to pay a dividend to its stockholders. And that's why most people invest in a REIT.
That was a really great explanation. Thank you for that. So going a little bit more into like what your typical day at work looks like, could you talk about some of the projects that you've done that you've really enjoyed as well?
Sure. So I could, I think now with Brookfield, so my typical day, I think taking a step back. So Brookfield is very different from Washington REIT. I think the first important piece to understand. So like I just said with the REIT, their main concern is paying that dividend, and they have to contribute 90% of the revenue to pay that dividend. And if they don't hit the dividend, it's very bad for a REIT. So they're very cash strapped. And as a result, you don't really have the flexibility in a REIT. And I think this is probably worth noting if you all are interested in real estate. I think it's the downside of going into a REIT. Is that because they're cash strapped, you don't really have as much flexibility to be creative. You can't really, put a lot of money of cash into a building to improve it because that cash needs to go to the investors. It's definitely much, I guess it kind of limits what you can do. So on the other hand, Brookfield operates, they bought the portfolio. It's a private fund, And when they bought the portfolio, they promised to hit an opportunistic, a high return to the investors that they raised money from. So Brookfield, on the other hand, they're willing to put a lot of money into the buildings because that helps boost their return, and they don't have to worry about every quarter paying out a dividend and reporting publicly. So Brookfield, my average day to day, I would say average, usually there will be, call it one call in the morning with one of the brokerage shops that I just mentioned, the CBRE or JLL or Cushman Wakefield. Those companies find tenants that will lease our buildings, and they get a commission on part of the deal, the cash flow. That's how they get paid. But the revenue that the office tenants give Brookfield, that's the biggest contributor for revenue at a building. It can be 95% of what the building earns. So we'll have those calls, and that will just make sure that the brokers are doing their job, and they'll give us reports on activity in the market. They'll provide recommendations on if we need to upgrade certain aspects of the building, or if certain suites need to be changed to make them more leasable. I'd say after that, there could be a deal that they send through. So Cushman could send in a deal, and I would evaluate that deal to see if that makes sense, and it aligns with our business plan for the building. And I can make recommendations back to them and then bless it to go out. Because really every little deal adds up to the big picture to, again, maximize the value of the building. And then on the kind of side, there will be, I guess, bigger strategy projects. And I think these are the parts I think are cooler, that with like a Brookfield that has money to spend, it could be, my boss might ask if we're going to put X number of dollars, or if we did put X number of dollars into one of our buildings, how much could we increase the rents that we're asking of tenants? And does that overall increase the value of the building? Like, does that make sense from an investment perspective? And that kind of opens up, again, you to be a little bit more creative. And, maybe we put in a fitness center in a lobby, or maybe the lobby's not worth it, or maybe the money should be spent here. It adds another layer that I think is kind of fun, and you can play around with it. And then there might be calls of like how our capital projects coming along that our construction team will give us updates on, or our development or design team might give an update on if we're doing a larger scale project. So there are a lot of other kind of side projects that all, again, the main goal of all of them is to increase the value of the building to hit the return we promised to our investors.
Thank you for that answer. I think when you were introducing yourself, you kind of mentioned that Jen helped you find your first internship with the CoStar Group. But then after that, you went full time with Washington REIT, and now you're at Brookfield. So I guess I was just wondering, how did you know that this was the right industry for you, and what things did you find during your internship that made you think you wanted to continue this, going into this industry full time?
Yeah, so when I originally, I'll be honest, the CoStar, like I really just took it because that, at that point, that's kind of what was on the table. I was not good my third year at the job search, and I was definitely behind at that point. So it originally kind of came in by luck. I didn't have a dream of pursuing real estate, but CoStar was a kind of dip my feet into it, and I thought it could be enjoyable to me. I like the fact that I think it's different. I don't think as many people, and this is definitely true, younger talent typically doesn't go to real estate as much right now for a number of reasons. But I think most of the more, I guess, successful undergrad students will do a conventional consulting, or maybe they'll I don't know, investment banking if it's in the cards, or something more finance. So I think it was different. I like the fact that, you can really get into it, and it's specific enough like you can really learn about the specific apartment asset class or office asset class, and you can kind of become an expert in it, not relatively quickly, but um, there is that element. And yeah, I think also the size of the industry is it's extremely big. There's a lot of money going around, and it leaves for a lot of opportunities. And again, coinciding with the fact a lot of times younger people won't go into it. There's there's definitely a lot of avenues you can go down once you're in, and a lot of real estate firms too, they'll prefer to hire people with a year or two experience because of this reason of it being a little bit more different and specific. So um yeah, it's just a little bit different and kind of intrigued me. And since I started at Wash Reed, I've enjoyed my experience in the industry.
So that actually is like a really good segue to one of the questions that a student asked. And we definitely want to get to it and later on in the panel about how you found these internships and positions. But there are a lot of students who are interested in real estate on this call. So for students like that, especially fourth years, where would you recommend they start in the field, especially if you're saying that it's mostly common for a lot of these firms to find people who are like 2 years out?
Yeah, so I think starting spot, I think I think to my point of like I think starting at a REIT, it does have benefits, and like I mean there's definitely some great jobs, but the point I made of because of how they're structured, it doesn't give them a lot of flexibility. I think it can inhibit your learning a bit, but I think for the first year or two, it's a really good first step in. And like I said, a lot of firms will like a year or two experience, so you can kind of hop from there. I think um, these brokerage shops that I mentioned, like CBRE or JLL, they'll have investment sales teams that I don't think the barrier to entry for those jobs is that high, and it gives you great experience valuing, performing valuation exercises on a lot of different buildings and asset classes. Um, in terms of actually finding them, I mean, I don't really know. I don't remember a lot of them coming to career fairs. I kind of think the best way you just have to reach out to people in the industry, and Jen can help kind of guide you, like use LinkedIn or maybe just do a little background research on the internet and see what types of firms kind of intrigue you. I mean, there's other ways to go too. Like I'm in asset management. You can go more an investments route. You can go more a development route. You could go a leasing route if you want. So there's several different types of entry roles. But I think generally once you're kind of in, it's not quite as important where you start. That experience you get at the start, the fact that you're just in the industry is very helpful, and it can and kind of guide you. I think the other way too, you can go a traditional finance route and then switch to real estate. So you can have a finance background and just be really in tune with the number side, and then switch to real estate, and they will definitely hire. So there's definitely multiple ways that you can go in.
Following up with that, what kinds of skills do you need to enter into REIT or other brokerage shops? I guess more technically speaking.
I've like technically, I mean, I don't think, like I said, the barrier to entry is too high. Like I'm sure everyone in this room has the technical skills that are really necessary. I mean, you really just have to. A lot of them will have an Excel test, and um, I mean, a little background in real estate would maybe help, but I think if you just have a pretty general Excel skills that you kind of pick up during classes at UVA, I think for the most part you'll be fine. I think any like little, DCF valuation boot camp or whatever to kind of prep you on that side, depending on the job you go for, can help. But yeah, I mean, I think if you have kind of general Excel skills and a general understanding of a DCF analysis, then you'll be fine. I definitely would not worry about that or fear that when you're going in.
That's great. Yeah, as you said, these are definitely skills that students can pick up in their classes, and there's also a lot of great resources out there that students can use to get some of that information. I think Jen is sending some sort of PDF for the DCF analysis skills. So, in addition to some of the technical skills that students might need, how did you prepare for your application process in general for your first job at WashREIT? And then also, what did it look like to transition to your current position at Brookfield Properties? You could talk about your interview process and what that was like with your employer.
Sure. So, so with Wash REIT, so coming out of CoStar, my fourth year, I was pretty set on real estate. That's definitely the majority, or the majority of my focus was. I'm a big fan. I still am a big fan of in-person events, career fairs, and I remember there were a lot of like small group information sessions, kind of like a few representatives from a company will come and they'll have like a PowerPoint presentation. They'll just tell you about the company, and a lot of times a lot of sign in. I think with real estate, it's a little old fashioned still, I think. And it's very network heavy. So I think a lot of them really like, I don't know, like a personal touch maybe. So if you go to one of those career fairs or info sessions and they have the name down and you just kind of put your face in their head, like they can kind of sort of remember you, like that, I think goes a long way for them wanting to hire you. But with Wash Reed, how I found out about it, I had a lot of final rounds to my senior year. I think I had six. Like I rejected from all of them, and then Washington Reed, I heard through a friend whose dad works in real estate in the area, and he had mentioned that they were hiring, and so I sure enough looked in and applied. And one thing I did too with Washington Reed, I remember, and I think kind of the little things that set you apart was that I think I had the first call, and then I did look on LinkedIn, saw somebody, a friend, he went to UVA and was somewhat involved in like the real estate organizations, but he had worked there, and I gave him a call, and he just left. He referred me to someone there, so I got a call with somebody at the company kind of before they reached out to me, which I think was pretty big. And then eventually there was an Excel test. It wasn't anything crazy, and did the final round and drove up to DC and interviewed, and then accepted the job there. So yeah, I mean, I think like I said, those little things of again, I reached out and gave somebody a call who kind of gave me the call, and they after I got the job, they noted that as something they liked. They even, weirdly enough, my boss, the one thing he pointed to is that I borrowed my friend's car and drove up, and like I did not think anything of that, but he thought that was, it showed I was extra interested that I had done that. Very random, but that's just what appealed to him. So it's those little things you don't really think about that can kind of be the reason. But that's how I started at Washington REIT. With Brookfield, it was a completely different scenario. It was a really weird situation. About a year into my job, like in hindsight, I now make sense that something was going on, but my work was slowing down. It was also the heat of the pandemic, so things were really dragging. And to my team of 5 people, the 2 people, it was basically a VP, there were 2 associates, 2 analysts. The 2 associates just abruptly left on the same day. And so, there was something going on, and then found out that WashREIT was selling the portfolio, and that I would be out the door of WashREIT pretty soon. So Brookfield, it's very large company. It has a very good reputation, so it kind of made sense at that point. Like my work had slowed. I probably didn't get the experience I wanted for a year of my first 2 years, and the Brookfield opportunity just kind of fell in my lap and I interviewed and ended up getting it and switching over. So with that, it was just a mix of really just a really odd situation.
Thank you for that answer. I think it gave us some really great insight into some of the transitions you made. So we want to make sure that students have time to ask their own questions for the student Q&A. So students, just as a reminder, if you do have questions to ask, feel free to either unmute yourself and ask directly, or you can send the question using the chat function to everyone, and I will read it out. So we'll just give everyone a few minutes. If anyone has any questions in the chat, we'll just wait for them to populate. But also, if you want to say your question out loud, feel free to do that and just unmute yourself. Okay, from the chat, we have, what was one big career hurdle you had to face, and what strategies or supports did you call upon?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the two big hurdles definitely, like I definitely the job search my senior year and the transaction of Wall Street to Brookfield. Um, the first one, just the original job search, like I said, like I just wasn't really on top of things my second and third year, which I'm sure a lot of students at UVA are the same way. And yeah, I mean, it was the original, like Jen got me in with the co-star, which kind of started everything else. So I think just like reaching out, and there's a lot of people at UVA who are willing to support you. At the end of the day, UVA wants you to get a job because it makes them look good as well. And that momentum carrying it through with the career fairs and info sessions, I think were big. And like I think that's the same way. Like the transaction, the Wall Street sale, it was definitely a big thing, and it was a really weird situation when when half of a company gets basically fired, and a lot of them find out when it goes public. It makes for a really really weird and I guess somewhat unfortunate situation, and a lot of people maybe didn't have a job lined up when their exit date came around. But then again, like in that situation, I really didn't know what to do. And Jen was one person I called. I called a number of people in the industry, like friends, family. So I got a really good range of answers and opinions. Like I talked to everybody at Wall Street too. Made 40 to 50 calls between people. And originally I didn't want to take the Brookfield job. I wanted to do something a little different, and I kind of sat on it, didn't really react to my initial emotions, and thought it all through. And end of the day, it was 100% the right decision, no doubt. So I think just you definitely just talk to as many people as you can, and people who want to support you, and just think things through. Don't react to anything right off emotion, right off the bat, and we'll be fine.
For sure, having a great network and support system is super important. Another question in the chat: how important do you think having experience with Argus is when applying for analyst positions?
Yeah, so Argus, I mean, it is for real estate. It depends on the asset class. It really, if you're going into office or retail, it is used all the time. Other asset classes, not as much. Like if you go into apartments / multifamily, you really won't use it. But in terms of actually the undergrad to entry level position, it's a nice little plus on your resume, but it's not really going to sway an employer's decision, I don't think. And a lot of them acknowledge that you will have to be trained on the job. So I would not say that's a huge factor at all. I think there's a lot of other factors that'll set you apart above knowing Argus. But I mean, if you do know it, definitely put it on the resume. It's a plus, but it's not that big of a plus, I don't think.
Another question in the chat. How did you prepare for your interviews?
Yeah, so I think kind of the two parts of this. One, like the standard, star method, and have a number of questions and possible answers. Like I do think that you 100% should do that, and that also when you're actually in the interview process, can make you more confident with your answers, and you can kind of convey information if you have a general like um, tell us about your internship experience your third year, and you have a couple bullets in your head, I did this, this, and this. But I think end of the day, like the thing that sets you apart is you have to have the experience of talking to people in person. Like between that, it makes you more comfortable talking with people. If you go to 5 career fairs for someone who goes to 0, um, those social skills you build up. Also, it's different talking to a superior rather than your friends on the weekend. It makes you more comfortable, and it's really easy to show. I would also say on top of that, like I know like being yourself is kind of the cliche, but it is very easy to tell when somebody is faking something or lying. Like if you don't know an answer to something when they ask you, you should just confidently say, I don't know, because it will make an employer more confident, right? That you're not BSing them to get something across. They can trust you at the end of the day. Um, the skills in the resume kind of get you in the door, but once you're in the door with the 5 other candidates, it's really about your attitude and who they want to invest in, who they think they're like working with the best, and has the attitude to kind of achieve the highest potential, because once you get in, they will train you to what they want you to do. So yeah, I think the in-person, just getting the experience talking to people is very invaluable. And I even know, the difference between myself end of third year when I didn't go to Eddie, and then to fourth year when I did, was really night and day.
Yeah, those are definitely great experiences and something that students should definitely take advantage of. I just, if any students have any other questions, definitely send them in the chat now, or feel free to unmute yourself. If not, I have a few other questions to get through, so we can continue on with those. So I'll just give students a few seconds, but.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Go for it.
Brendan, can you talk a little bit about how you got the internship in Pennsylvania? Because that was early on between second and third year. And I think it is really difficult for students to find it, to build their experience during that time with real world experience.
Yeah, that one was sort of random, and it's weird. Like I had trouble finding one third year, but the one after second year kind of fell into my lap. It really, like, I had a friend I knew who did the same internship, and it was actually just in a group message. He's one of my close high school friends. He just mentioned that if anyone was interested in doing it, the employer reached out to me to see if he had known anybody, and I just texted back like, yeah, sure, I'd be interested, and pretty quickly got it. So I think it just kind of shows like you don't really know where the opportunity will come from. It can really be random, but you just kind of have to act on it rather than, you could easily, it's your friend and a GM, you could easily just not really respond or think much of it. But I also think like that internship my second year was better experience than my third year one, and I still use a lot of that today. It really improved my finance acumen for my job now.
That's really interesting. And I think that, as you said, that really just speaks to how important connections are. So kind of going off of that, I think we've talked a little bit about it, but how do you establish connections with people in the field? And I guess, how do you maintain those connections after they're established?
Yeah, so once you're in the field, once you're in the actual job, I think one, developing a good relationship with your coworkers. A lot of times they'll be the ones to kind of help you. And if you go to an event, real estate's it's a very network heavy industry. like I said, it's very old fashioned too. A lot of it is still like, networking is done. Some people go out for some drinks, or there'll be an event on a space or a rooftop or something. So, but if you develop a good relationship with the coworkers, once you're at those events, they'll kind of help you out and be like, hey, this person just started, meet this person. And then people outside the field, it kind of depends what you do, but usually you'll work with a fair number of external people. And I mean, if you show also that, on top of this too, like you take your job seriously and do a good job, they'll recognize, you're working hard and you're open to learning, and they'll like you and kind of help you out. And like those leasing calls with the third parties, like if you are very responsive to their emails or this or that, when you see them, they'll say hi, and there you go. And I think once you have the connection, keeping it like you do, I think that can be hard, especially if you did interact with somebody and then you didn't. I really think you just have to kind of make a note to self, like maybe it's just say happy birthday, text them happy birthday or something, but literally just could be one message a year will go a long ways. A once a year personalized message, as most people do not do that.
Yeah, that's a great point. In terms of when you're actually making that connection, have you ever had reached out for kind of like informational interviews? And if so, preparing for those, what kinds of questions did you ask during the informational interview?
Are you saying, have I ever given an informational interview, and what questions did I ask?
Yes.
So I have not given I haven't really actually given an interview yet. I mean, I've been asked informational questions. I feel like for my career path, I didn't as much, but it would depend. So like from Wall Street to Brookfield, I actually didn't even give my resume. I just met the team, and they knew I knew the buildings well, so I was valuable to them in that sense. But depending on the job, especially if you go into something a little bit more on the investment side, I think you'll get asked some questions like, I mean, they might just ask you a definition of like, how do you calculate an IRR, a levered IRR, or maybe they'll ask you like, I don't know, something about what's going on in real estate, or like, what do you think about this building as in terms of an investment thesis? But I don't really think, especially entry level, they're going to hit you with anything too hard, because again, like they know that you're coming in and they have to train you for what they want you to do. But yeah, I mean, I think just a very general, like the fundamentals of like a DCF, and maybe do a little background research on real estate investing, but it won't be anything crazy.
So we want to make sure that we end this panel on time. So this will be our last question, but also just to highlight something that Jen sent in the chat, Brendan does have a slot available for his office hours after the panel. So if you're interested in that, make sure that you're sending Jen a message. And so with our last question, I think a lot of us are curious how you see yourself using your current job to advance your career. Do you think that you'll stay in the real estate industry, or do you think this position right now is more of like a stepping stone for another job?
Yeah, so I think, and then maybe this is helpful, like where you what type of job in real estate. So I'm in asset management, and in asset management, you are the team. My team we oversee the buildings, and we're responsible again for making the right decisions to continue to maximize the building's value. And ultimately, we also end up going through the sale process. We execute the sale of the building to hit the return that we promised. But with asset management, you're working on the same assets all the time. So you get a deeper understanding of real estate, and kind of the brick and mortar part of it. You get a lot of like the actual, like, how does the mechanical side, like how does a building actually operate, the legal side, like what type of legal documents do you need to have, which are a lot, the level of depth you get in is something you wouldn't really get from an investment or more finance side. The kind of other way to go, you go more on investment side, and when I was talking to people, I probably got a 50-50 of if you do wanted to start an asset management or more investments. But when you get more on investment side, you'll probably get exposed to more assets and buildings, and you'll be valuing a larger pool of buildings, but you won't go as in depth into them. So I mean, it's different, and I mean, like a more investment side, it gives you a broader experience, and maybe that can kind of help you figure out what you like. But if you really want to dive into, I guess, real estate investing, I think asset management, and a lot of people and employers want some type of asset management experience. So it's something to think about, and they're definitely very different. So I think for me, like I've worked on the same portfolio for 2 years. At some point, I probably want to transition to either get a experience with other types of assets outside of office and retail, maybe in different markets also. So I think I still have a little bit left with Brookfield, and I really enjoy the team. And I mean, Brookfield's an awesome company. And ideally, maybe after another year or so, switch internally, I think would be the ideal scenario into a more investment side. And then I'd kind of have a pretty well-rounded background.
I had one follow-up question before we wrap. We had been curious about informational interviewing, and I think it would help the group here, Brendan, to hear about some of the informational interviewing that you did that you conducted when you were a student. Because I really get the feeling for our students in particular, those conversations help build confidence. I mean, not only do you build your network, but it helps build confidence, as you were saying, to speak with other professionals rather than just, your peers at school. Could you talk a little bit about that, about maybe one or two, networking conversations you had with UVA alums?
Yeah, and there's one Jen referred me to. His name's Matt Weinreich, and he works. He has a portfolio of apartments up in the New York metro area in Jersey City, and I spoke with him before I started at Wash Street. I've kept in touch with him as well. I spoke with him between Wash Street and Brookfield. I was like, hey, what should I do here? But my initial call, I think the number one thing that's important from the informational side is you definitely should do your background research on the company, or in his case, what he does. I guess in his case, both what his company does and what he does for the company. Like, if you're going to call somebody, you don't want to go in with cold feet and just be like, hey, what should I do? You have any jobs out there? Because it just kind of shows you're lazy and you don't really care, take it seriously. So if you literally just know, like, look on the website or the LinkedIn and maybe have one question like, so I see you're, developing a apartment building in Jersey City. Could you tell me more about that? And you start off that way. Then they know, like, okay, he's done the background research, he's interested or she's interested, and then you can kind of ask for there. I also wouldn't don't ask for jobs directly. I'd kind of be like more, hey, do you know of any opportunities in the area or through your network or anyone that you could refer me to? And I think at the end of the call, always make it a goal to get one thing out of it, whether it be another connection or or something. Maybe you just keep the existing connection. But I think just a little background research to show that you are taking it seriously is very important, and it's very important for whatever firm you're interviewing for too.
Thank you so much for that advice for students.